couldn't be here this week because of family medical issues with his wife. He's taking care of his wife up in Seattle, Washington area. What I like to do is just read his bio that's in his book, and also talk about his book and kind of take you through some scenes and efforts through that. It's a fiction book. It's a made-up bomb group. When you look at his book for the 328th Bomb Group, there is no 328th Bomb Group, or the Squadron, or the Lodestone Lola nose art. But what he did was he combined all of the events during that time period. He's done extensive research and interviews with Marauder men during that time period to talk about what went on during that time period, just before the D-Day invasion, and just after that when Lodestone Lola gets shot down in a special mission in July. And then there's a present day feature in the book as well. But let me read his bio. Jay Spencer is a Seattle author who has written more than a dozen books and many hundreds of articles. He's won professional writing awards at the national and international level. His first two children's chapter mysteries took back-to-back first place blue ribbons in categories from Gertrude Warner Books Awards for middle grade fiction, part of the annual. You know, I have a college education, but I cannot pronounce some words, so it's just an international book awards competition. Jay served as an assistant curator of aviation at the National Air and Space Museum, Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. He was subsequently the curator of the Mission of Flight in Seattle. Switching careers, he spent more than 2 decades with the Boeing Company as a communications professional. Now embarked on his third career, Jay pursues his passion for fiction by creating original screenplays and novels. Lodestone Lola is a labor of love. Although fictionalized, this work is based on the author's decades of exhaustive primary and secondary research. Astonishing as it may seem, almost everything depicted in the novel actually occurred among the 8 Marauder bomb groups in the European theater of operations. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go into a slide presentation to kind of take you through some of the events in the book. And of course, it takes place in the European theater of operations. This is a picture of the plane with the fictional nose art. And it is a story of personal conflict, acceptance, mission success, and then survival and remembrance. And this is basically what the book is all about. It's the story of the plane getting into action, getting to know the plane and the crew. There is an antagonist there. The pilot is kind of, I want to be a fighter pilot, but I'm in bombers. What's going on with that? So he has a hard time fitting in. The preparation for the D-Day operation where the B-26s went in at low level and hit Utah Beach. And then some of the missions afterwards, and then at the end, remembering Lodestone Lola. This is pretty accurate here. The sky was full of fire, a bomber crew. Find those veterans, get their stories. Don't forget who they were and what they were all about. At the beginning of the book, it starts out with looking for the survivors of Lodestone Lola. The plane was found in the book. It's fiction, like I said. And they're trying to find who the pilots were, the crews, and so on and so forth. Well, they find the pilot, present day, and he's getting up there in age. But then they want to find out what the story was all about. And then the story goes into what he was all about. I'll explain who that character is in Flat Bait later on. This is the crew. The main character here is Jack Braden. Frank Calliard, who is the co-pilot, turns out to be kind of a chicken, and he doesn't like to fly. He doesn't like to land, he doesn't like to take off, but Jack kind of pushes him in that direction sometimes, but he's fearful of the aircraft. The Bombardier Navigator, the original one is Rusty, and then his replacement, and I'll talk about what happened there, is another flight officer who is known as Chick, or Spotted Bird. He's a Native American Indian. The flight engineer, the radio ops guy, and the armored tail gunner, they all kind of stick around and help him through the missions and survive. The conflict here is with Jack. He really didn't want to be a B-26 pilot. He wanted to be a hotshot B-51, B-47, B-38 pilot. So he's kind of like, I really don't like being here, and I really don't want to get involved with anything. But he's kind of forced to because he's there. He's on orders. He's been trained as a B-26 pilot. He's going to do his mission. So there's a lot of, friction at the beginning of this with other pilots in the bomb group. And that's typically what happens. But here in the ETO for the 9th Air Force and for his bomb group, you can see obviously out of East Anglia, you're going into the occupied territory for bombing missions, and eventually you're going to move into occupied areas after D-Day, 1944. This is the approximate region where the A-20 and B-26 groups were located, just north of the Thames estuary in England, East Anglia. So that's where the missions were flown out of. This is a typical view of an airfield, and you can see there's 3 runways, 6 approaches when you can come from either side. And it was a very typical construction when they built all these. There were over 125 that were our U.S. airfields that were in East Anglia. And you can see the typical parking areas for the planes. Some of them were right next to farmers' fields. So when they were starting up their planes, the exhaust and everything else could kind of push into some of the farm machinery and kind of push people over if they weren't too close. But you could hear the noise from the houses. And this is the best shot I could find of where you had some of the airfield activities right next to a farm in East Anglia. They're really close. I mean, they heard all the activity at night when they're trying to work on the aircraft and then firing up the engines, getting ready to go on missions. I mean, the farmers heard all this stuff, and they kind of put up with it. They're there for a reason. This is a good picture of some of the winter operations and what they look like. The snow, you can imagine being out there in the wintertime. Some of you know what my military background was. I was Air Force enlisted originally, then I went in the Army later on. But I actually, when I came back from Southeast Asia, from Vietnam and Thailand, I got stationed up in Minot, North Dakota during the Cold War. Nobody's laughing at that. You've never been to Minot. It's cold up there. So I was out on loading bombs on B-52s in a Cold War cold environment. And it's pretty nasty, but you can imagine what it was like out there without too many things out there to kind of shield what we were doing. They had buildings set up and shacks and whatever, and it was pretty brutal to work on the aircraft. And of course, sometimes this was the result of some of the missions, coming in, crashing and burning, or coming in and just kind of a plane falling apart from all the activity and survival or death of some of the crews that went on the missions. Some of the bomb loading operations, getting the planes ready for missions, the taxi and takeoff areas that were there, and some changes. As Jack went on, he actually had some fights that went on in some of the officers' clubs that were there in Mesa areas. He actually got used to his crew, flying with his crew, accepting their faults. But like I said, his co-pilot was kind of a chicken. He was very fearful of flying the whole time. He could hardly land and take off the aircraft, which he could do if he was asked to do. But he got to know everybody and kept going. Kept moving on, making sure that he could take care of his crew and, of course, survive missions. It's another crash landing at a base that they survived. And more bomb loading operations, which is, like I said, these guys are pretty busy making sure that everybody's got what they need when they go on mission. And then this right here, I remember Jerry Rashke. Remember Jerry Rashke? Yeah. Jerry actually flew on the same crew as my uncle did for 5 of my uncle's missions. But he had mentioned sometimes he had the photography on the aircraft. He was the photographer on the mission. He told me, and I don't know how valid it is, but he told me when he saw this picture in one of the publications, he says, I took that shot, not to take the shot when it exploded, but it happened at the moment he took the frame. He didn't know it was going to get hit. So he claims credit for taking this picture for the archives that are out there that everybody sees. So, Jerry, I know you passed away and you're sleeping in your grave, but I think you probably did do that, so I'm going to give you credit for it. And then other battle losses. See somebody explode in the air. Pretty brutal, especially if you know them. They're your bunkmate. They're not there anymore when you get back. This is a typical formation over France. And this is some battle damage that is pretty bad. You can tell, you can see where the turret gun there is been kind of smashed apart, and he's probably not around anymore. But there's some pretty brutal flak damage that we can get out from these missions. As we all know, the B-26 was a hot airplane, very fast takeoff, and a really high-speed landing. It was hard to handle if you weren't trained properly. And that's what Doolittle found out about the aircraft, is that they had to be trained properly. It's something that's unforgiving. You better know what the heck you're doing when you're in the B-26. And more loading operations for mission success. It's just tremendous on how many rounds of ammunition are put into the aircraft, and of course how the bombs are set up and ready for release during missions. And of course the crew of the Lodestone Lola got their orders to, you're going to be part of the D-Day invasion, setting up the attack on Utah Beach to make sure that the landing there is successful. And the B-26s came in low level. And of course just a few days before they took off, they were ordered to put invasion stripes on the aircraft. And you can see them painting that on the plane right now. That was about 48 hours before the mission. They had to paint up all these aircraft, and that was bombers, fighters, the C-47s where the air wing troops were going to go out on. They had to have these invasion stripes. Even though we had pretty good air superiority, we wanted to make sure that everybody could identify an Allied plane and not shoot them down when they were coming over their positions. And this is one that's fully painted and going over on mission. During the briefing, dark 30. What time is that? Well, it's any time before 4 o'clock in the morning. That's what I was pretty typical of. But anyways, you can see they look like they're yawning. Some people are yawning in there. But they're getting their mission orders for D-Day. And of course, the target is Utah Beach. Actually, the 101st Airborne Division isn't on this map. I have some friends that were in the 101st in Vietnam. But anyways, their target was to soften up the targets on Utah Beach so that the troops get in there and land without too much injury. And I found this online, and it's claimed that this was the route that was taken from East Anglia to the target, turning around and heading back. And you can see it's coming from this area right here at low level. Beach is right around in here. And after leaving the beach, circle around and come around and maybe come back and hit anything else if you had to come back and hit anything else from all the pathfinders that were out there, and then head back across to England to go home and get back to base. But there was a lot of flak during that time. Now this is an aerial view of the landing itself. This is something, I don't know if you've all been to Utah Beach recently. Anybody been there, Normandy? This museum is there, and it has this B-26, but that B-26 is not the same model that Dynamite was originally for the invasion. But it's a good depiction of a B-26 and what they did at that beach, and the success they had on the beach. Minimal casualties on that beach when it actually occurred. And of course, if you're going to bail out of the aircraft, Bombay, rear Bombay. I've heard some people say if there was the side gunners or the waist gunners, you could actually dive out that hatch if you needed to. But keep in mind, those crew members could not walk around with their parachute packs on them. They had their harnesses on their bodies. What they had to do is go find their pack, clip it on, and then jump out. Now, if the tail is down, or excuse me, if the nose gear is down, this open area right down here would be another exit ramp right here, but that's not always available unless the pilot decides to pull the landing gear down and you jump out that area. So it's pretty dangerous, it's pretty tight. You better know what you're doing, you better know where your parachute pack is to get out of the aircraft. And it can be dangerous. Now, a backstory to this, the commanding officer, who was a colonel, was somebody that was considered very privileged, silver spoon in his mouth, didn't like being in England, was afraid to fly, literally afraid to fly. He trembled when he got into a plane and went on a mission if they told him they needed to go up for a mission. He actually went on one of the mission during D-Day, and this is depicted, this is fictional, but it's based on a real person. I think some of you might know who that is. But the guy was actually wandering through the aircraft, and somehow somebody hit the alarm bell, the bailout bell, and he took that as real. Guess what do you think he did? He jumped out. He jumped out over the beach and became an infantry soldier, or he got captured or killed. I don't know. I can't remember what was in the book. But anyways, this commanding officer of the group jumped out of the aircraft, and of course, over the intercom, the pilot said, "Oh, false alarm, don't go anywhere." Well, it's too late. The commanding officer, this colonel, is already out and he's joined the infantry. So he abandons the crew, and of course the crew makes it back in one piece. And there's no word in the book about who takes over for him, but a couple times during their stay there, they had Lancaster bombers that would go up on night missions. And they came in, if they were damaged beyond, they couldn't come back safely, they would land at whatever airfield was available. And this is basically a depiction of what these German night fighters would do. That's a VF-110, and it had angled, well, let me show you how it's set up. It would go under the aircraft at the right angle, and you can see there were some blind spots on the Lancaster bomber, the British bomber. He'd go under and hit his cannons and just kind of tear up the undercarriage of the Lancaster and go after those targets. And of course, it was designed to do. It was a night fighter. And of course, they'd land, and they're a mess, and a lot of them survived, but some of the crew obviously did not. During the D-Day mission on Lodestone Lola, one of the bombardier was shot in the head by a single bullet. A lucky shot from the ground went through the plexiglass of the nose of the B-26 right into his head, killed him instantly. That was the only loss that they had that day. But it was pretty devastating to such a freakish thing, and a lucky shot. And that did happen at times, and I've heard of some stories in Vietnam as well where some Navy aircraft were hit that way. And it was a lucky shot from a farmer or some soldier that shot in the air, and it went through the plexiglass of the aircraft and killed the pilot and co-pilot. So you got a damaged plexiglass, you got to get it fixed, put the new one on, get ready for the next mission. You got to keep going. Package guns. Very effective package guns. Dick Bailey, who knows the story of him shooting down an aircraft, but it turns out it was a probable. They couldn't confirm that it actually hit the ground, but the package guns were designed for low-level strafing and not for air-to-air combat. Flak was pretty accurate. When it hit, it was pretty devastating. Of course, after the crew is back, they discuss what's going on and that they survived. They came back in one piece. Now you see the one individual coming up from the nose gear area. There's actually a nice exit catch in the plane that they can go in and out of the nose wheel area. Another taxi out for a mission. It's another loss, a total loss. There are no parachutes on this aircraft. I think this is a 320th Bomb Group aircraft, if I'm not mistaken. but they didn't make it. Tail gunners, guess what the tail gunner does? Keeps an eye on the 6, okay, the 6th part of the aircraft. This is a picture of the interior. Where's the co-pilot seat? Anybody know that?
All the way back.
Say again?
It's all the way back.
It's all the way back. You can push that back. And of course you can push it forward if you need to for landings and takeoffs. The Norden bomb sight. Of course you're going to do it at low level. The Norden bomb sights were not real accurate at high level. But they were very accurate at low level, which was good for the B-26s. This is the position of the top turret gunner. Pretty good view from that point. My uncle flew turret gun. He was a flight engineer in his bomb group and squadron. It's a pretty good position to be in. Jerry Raschke actually shot down a plane from the turret gun, if you heard his story at our previous reunions. And you can imagine having these air fighter planes screaming at you. If you've seen the series Masters of the Air, you get a pretty good idea of how frightening that is to have those things coming at you and firing from the forward, from the side, and just sweeping around. And how are you going to shoot these things down and get them out of your area? The waist gunners on the B-26, you can see there's one guy that handles 2 guns. There's the turret gun right in back of them. You see this right here? This is a rail system for ammunition that takes it back to the tail gun. Rather than having a box of ammunition sitting right next to the tail gunner, it's a rail system that takes some ammunition from the Bombay area on a track that takes it to the gun. That was actually developed by the Lionel Train Company. So they did toys, before the war, but they developed this track system for the Bombay. But you can see he'd go from one gun to either side when he would have to fight. After D-Day, and they got a little bit of a respite, they went into London for R&R. They could see the damage that was out there. Trafalgar Square was a mess. You had the fires from the other raids that were coming through. They were still bombing London. And this is damage near St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and near the bomb damage by Big Ben. They actually slept down in these tubes. They called them the tubes. It was a subway for shelters for bombings, night bombings, whatever. And this is a nice photograph of some unit recognition at the time for another mission. But the crew is ready for work. They're working together. They're getting their stuff together. They understand each other. The pilot's getting used to being with everybody. He's trusting his co-pilot a little bit more. He's kind of helping him out. He's being a mentor to get him through the missions. But then there's this, on July 7th and the 9th, there were night missions that were assigned to the B-26 groups. And they went on a night mission. And this is taxiing out at dusk. What the tail gunner watched from an adjoining plane when they got hit on the mission was one of the crews jumped out, and instead of pulling the ring on his parachute pack, he released his harness. Guess what happened to him? He dove into his death. That guy, and that's based on a real event. Jay was telling me that the person that he interviewed about that situation, he says he thinks about it every day. He's still frightened with it. Of course, that happened over 80 years ago. Another night mission. This is a Junkers Ju-88 night mission attack on Lodestone Lola. They're getting beat up pretty bad on this mission. In fact, none of them make it back. The waist guns are doing whatever they need to do to get the enemy away. And then they're looking at some of the other planes and see who else is surviving. And then they got to bail out. Frank, the co-pilot, is just chicken and he's frozen. Jack gets him out of there and gets him out after the crew has left. He's ordered the crew to bail out. But he does get him out. He rings the bell and says, bail out, get the heck out of this aircraft. And they do get out. and Lodestone Lola does not survive. But somebody has found it years later, and they want to know what it's all about. And they do find Jack as an old veteran with his wife. His wife is actually a war bride. She was actually by the air base there that he met and fell in love with and married, and had been married to for years. But this professor finally found the pilot to Lodestone Lola so he could finish the story. And then after he interviewed him, Jack dies. And that's the end of the story. I've told you the end of the story. I'm sorry about that. If you like to read novels, it's really pretty good. I read through it obviously before I came here. Any takeaways from that? War is hell, for one. If any of you have ever been in combat or been under fire or whatever, I mean, you realize how fearful that is. I can imagine what it was like to be in an aircraft at 15, 20,000 feet and have fighter planes screaming at you. I'd much rather be in a foxhole, I'll tell you right now, kind of hiding under as much dirt and cement as possible with bunkers. Hold on for questions, please. This is Jay Spencer. He actually got to sit in the flak bait at the National Museum when it was downtown. And that's him as a young man on the left. And of course, that's him present day. And I've had several conversations with him. He's a he's a gentleman. He really is. He's a wonderful orator. Had some great thoughts with him. I helped him out on this presentation. But he's sorry he could not be here. He wanted to be here because he was so fond of Marauder men and who he had interviewed over the years. He's known many of them. He said he's known over 100 that he's interviewed and talked with over the years. And he did want me to put this in the presentation. These are the ladies that helped us get the B-26s where they needed to be. And of course train some of the pilots that were too chicken to get into the airplane. Okay, they figured out how to do it safely, and they were pretty good at it. So he wanted me to honor them at the end here. Okay, that's it. Any questions? Yes.
So, thank you for the presentation, by the way. So, when you had these American airfields in Angleton, if I'm pronouncing that right.
East Anglia.
Yeah. So there must have been another airfield every 2 or 3 miles.
Oh yeah, there were over 125 U.S. airfields.
So the question has to do with returning maybe after dark, maybe you have low clouds. So how did the crews identify how to home in on their...
Well, they would have a control tower that would have a signal that they would put out. If they weren't following that and they went to another airfield that looked like it was airfield, they landed. It was like, oops, well, I guess the next day I got to take off and go back to my airfield.
No, I was just wondering if they would have beacons with Morse code.
Yes, they do. They had beacons on it that they could figure out where they were and who they were, and they'd follow that signal in. Of course, if they're damaged from their mission and they don't have any radio, it's all visual and line of sight. Where am I? And let's see if I can identify certain landmarks. And of course, they probably flew out of those things enough where they could identify landmarks and that they could guide themselves in. But yeah, it was radio signals and beacons that would bring them in.
And then the follow-up is, were the fighter bases more or less embedded close to the bomber bases?
Not necessarily. I don't know exactly where they were, but they were scattered around. Because you had the heavy bombers at the other airfields. And you saw where I had where the 9th Air Force was kind of clustered, and some of the other fighter bases were clustered in other areas around East Anglia. But it's just the pilot getting used to where he is or where he's supposed to be. And then listening to the radio signals to get him back to the right airfield. And of course, like I said, if he's looking for landmarks to get back to his base, he knows where he should be going, especially if he's past London or if he's north of the ninth, some estuary or some river or whatever. He better know where the heck he is. But if he's in trouble, he's gonna land at the best place he can land. So, anything else? Did you have a question, ma'am?
On getting the co-pilot out of that plane, he had to move back, did he not, to get the bumping navigator
Yes.
out of the nose?
Yes, that's correct. That kind of opened up the access to the lower level, to the nose, yes.